Are they getting better because of you or in spite of you? And this was a really interesting thought, or just change in perspective and mindset. You know, we always say, oh, kids could just look at weights and get stronger, or all kids need to do is sprint. Well, there's some truth to that. So what are you doing to not get in their way? You know, are they getting better because of you or in spite of you? Sharing stories from sports performance. That's what we do here on the Talking Shop podcast. I'm here to help change the lens in which you view performance in your job, thus changing the impact you can make. I'm your host, Matt Tometz, and today on episode 103, I'm here to take you through my simplified guide on how to coach youth athletes, any athlete from ages 8 to 18. So let's do it. So first, what are you most nervous about relative to coaching youth athletes? Is there anything that you're unsure about? Anything that you feel you would specifically get out of this episode? And next is, what's one aspect of coaching these athletes, even if you feel like you do a pretty decent job, that you think you can level up and improve your coaching skills at as well? So hopefully I can address both of these questions, or if I haven't, please let me know, and I'd love to dive in further. But these are two main questions that I'm hoping to address throughout the course of this episode. So LTAD, long-term athletic development, this new fancy word about applying science to developing youth athletes. And there's all of these different models and stuff. On the left, I have one that's all of these different abilities that you can train, going from years 2, I guess, all the way up to 21 plus, growth rate, maturation status, training adaptation, all the physical qualities. And then on the right, I have probably what you first thought of when I said LTAD: active start, fundamentals, learn to train, train to compete, train to win. I use the one more to the right in general when I think about LTAD, and just where does the coach fit into this LTAD model, not necessarily in regards to the specific adaptations and what words are bigger or more bold or colored than others relative to when you should or shouldn't be training these certain qualities, because you should be training them all of the time. But it's good to understand which or why it is happening. But what I decided to put a circle around on this was the training adaptation is predominantly neural and age related up until ages 11, 12, 13. And then beyond there, it's neural and hormonal or maturity related. So I guess that this could extend out until 13, 14, 15, depending on when the kid hits puberty. So a majority of the gains, hashtag gains, that happen for a youth athlete, like I said, 8 to 18, is going to be neural. So just keeping this in the back of your mind, where do you fit in fundamentals, learn to train, train to compete, with mostly neural related changes? So LTAD, kind of my own spin or take or definition of it, is simply working on all skills of athletic development, long-term athletic development. What skills are needed to be athletic? How do I develop all of them that are going to help them in the long term? I know, rocket science, right? Balance, coordination, speed, strength, power, agility, hand-eye coordination, proprioception. And then within the movements, running, acceleration, top speed, deceleration, jumping, landing, cutting, all of those different things. And you can address each one of these topics, which I'll get to later. But the main thing that I underlined on this slide was an LTAD, you giving them as an outside coach what they don't get while playing their sports. Now, although there are bits and pieces of all of this stuff in most sports, not all sports have all of these. Where do you fit in into giving them what they don't get anyways? That's where I believe you have the most value in this process. And now it's my 30-second shameless plug. I have some YouTube videos up on how I use tennis balls for hand-eye coordination training, cant rules just to spark creativity, tumbling, and how I do that for athletic development, as well as a 2.0 tennis ball video coming very soon, depending on when you listen to this episode. Those are on my YouTube channel. Just search at Matt Tometz. So where do you fit into this LTAD model as a coach? Now, I referenced this a little bit 2 slides ago, but as a performance coach, strength and conditioning coach, whatever your job title is, you fit into this long-term athletic development model, exposing them to all of these stimuli, making them fall in love with training, and teaching them the fundamentals. And if you can, over time, expose them to all of these things, make them want to come back and understand that there is a ton of value apart from actually playing the game, and then they learn the fundamentals that are going to set themselves up for not only whatever specific sport they play right now, but also whatever sports they could play later. I think that you're going to be doing a pretty decent job as a coach of youth athletes. Youth athletes, like I said, just 8 to 18, and all this stuff applies just in ratios, varying degrees. They slightly change over time, and I'll give some examples later. But that's just for context. This is what I'm using youth athletes as. So why are they there? Why are your youth athletes training with you? What do they want? Fun. Oh my gosh, call me a rocket scientist. What they don't want, monotony. Monotony as in doing the same thing over and over and over again. And this isn't to say that doing similar type training or building on drills, building on lifts is not valuable. This is to say that to go 4 weeks instead of 3 weeks, just because it's what a traditional program calls for, or that you have to hit every single step on the progression, or you have to do each progression 2 weeks at a time before moving on, just for the sake of it, or just because, I don't think is appropriate for youth athletes. What their parents want, and this is important to put out there because the money signs, the dollar bills, depending on what sector you're in, the parents are the ones that are supplying the funds for their kid to train with you. And what do the parents want? They want a good workout, and they want their kids to visually improve. Now, a good workout is they come in the car all sweaty, excited. Oh my gosh, it was so cool, mom and dad. We did this, bouncing off the inside of the car. I'm super excited to go back next time. And for them to visually improve. And this is one of those really interesting things that I recently experienced, now having been in the private side for an extended period of time, not just in between my years at school, is that parents notice the smallest things, or the things that they decide to text you about as a coach are really interesting. And the first one I received was a middle school baseball player, 7th grade, I want to say, not the most athletic. He's one of those guys that's just like kind of big for his age and can play baseball well, not the fastest or whatever. And the mom texted me and said, "Oh, my son rounded third base so confidently, and he was going so fast, and he slid headfirst into home, and he's never done that before." You know, she's not talking about his form. She's not talking about whatever warm-up drills I taught him to do. She's talking about he just looked different rounding the base, and he felt so fast that he decided to slide headfirst into home. And those are those things that you can't quantify, you can't predict, that you just have to trust the process, and that type of feedback will come over time. So I think breaking it down into what the kids want, what they don't want, and what the parents want is really interesting, just to give all of this a little bit more context. So consequently, if your job is to make them fall in love with training, if your job is to put the fun in fundamentals, you consequently have to know what is fun. So basically, what did you want as a youth athlete? What kind of practices were you excited to go to? What type of coaches did you really enjoy working with? You know, what was memorable? And I have 2 pictures here of, I believe this was 8th grade baseball. And my coach, K-Fed, I don't remember too much about the specific drills or training or practices or stuff like that. But I just remember he was super nice. He was super encouraging, you know, whenever it was time to be a little tough, you know, like he just did it appropriately. Like I could tell that he really cared about us. And when I was making the slide, I went to my Facebook photos, and I was just wondering if I had any pictures with him or, you know, with this team. And I guess I had 2. And there's me right there. And like I said, it's not even that I remember the crazy drills that were simple but really helped, or the structure of practice just made so much sense. looking back, I just remember I just enjoyed playing for him for a few of the reasons that I do actually remember. But oh my gosh, how do I make training fun? Or I don't know what I would ever do. Well, you were an athlete once, draw on that experience. What coaches were awesome? What coaches kind of sucked? And then just figure it out from there. You know more about fun than you think you do. And consequently, if you want to know what's fun for your athletes, well, why don't you ask your athletes what you find fun? Again, I am a certified rocket scientist. You have your own focus group. Your focus group is your intended audience. So, and here's one example. The 1080 sprint, for those who are familiar or are not, piece of sprint technology. It calculates all of this data. It's super cool. The resistance is amazing. It's just such a nice piece of technology. And I just have such an appreciation and love for it. And then I was working with some youth athletes and they're like, oh, the 1080, like, this is so boring. And I'm just speechless. I'm like, boring? You think the 1080 is boring? Like, and they don't have an appreciation or a fascination for all of the data and just an ability to not respect, but just understand how cool it really is. So if they're not into the 1080, why am I going to make them go on it? And I'm not, because I listen to my focus group. And this is one of the hidden benefits of working with youth athletes is more likely than not, they're going to speak their mind. So whether it's a little offhand comment of, oh, it says 1080, or you specifically asking, hey, what was your favorite part about today? What was your least favorite part? And if you have that relationship, then you have that trust and you can communicate, hey, I literally want to know because I want to make this the most fun for you possible. You're not going to hurt my feelings. Just be nice when you say it. You'd be surprised at some of the feedback you can get. So to figure out what's fun, draw on your own experience, but also ask your athletes because that's who you're doing it for anyways. Here are some of the main considerations when working with these youth athletes. And this is one of the slides that builds on this idea of all of these things apply just in varying degrees depending on their age. So attention span. So I guess I'll talk about younger athletes first. Attention span, short. Ability to stand still, short. Toleration for repetition or routine, short. Ability to get up and go, long. So if I had to vaguely summarize coaching the youth athlete, it's going to be don't do things that require them to focus for extended periods of time. Don't let them stand around for too long doing nothing. Change it up and just keep them moving. Rocket science, again, I know. And here I have this little infographic thing I made. And it's the desire for routine. And then as it goes up over time. So youth athletes, they have no desire for a routine. High school athletes, medium-ish desire. They can appreciate doing the same thing, kind of building on it. But if it was super monotonous, they probably wouldn't be fans. And adults, they could do the same warm-up for an entire year and they would just enjoy it because they know what's happening. With an asterisk, of course, everyone always wants the fun stuff. But I think that was a cool visual representation to build on the toleration for repetition or just this idea of routine. And building on that, more considerations, or building on the considerations I previously shared, these variables will shift over time as they get older with the previous example. But now I'll talk on a little bit older athletes. Let's get up to that 16, 17, 18 range. Attention span, long. Ability to stand still, long. Toleration for repetition, longer. I wouldn't do the exact same thing every single time, but it's definitely longer than when they were younger. Ability to get up and go, short or shorter. And one example of this is on a 1080 sprint, my favorite, is doing overspeed training. So where the machine, it's assisted running. So the machine pulls you forward. It's very neurally taxing, very high skill, very fast. And we have done that with groups of 6 high school athletes, where an athlete will do the overspeed. They'll run towards the machine. They'll take off the belt. Someone will hop in. They'll walk away from the machine to then be pulled. And then when they come back, the first athlete will walk to the end of the track and then do a sprint by themselves. So kind of like a contrast. And it works pretty well because you have athlete 1 overspeed, athlete 2 walk out, athlete 2 does their overspeed, athlete 1 walks to do the contrast, and then athlete 3 walks out, they do their, and from an outsider, you'd say, oh, well, they're really standing around kind of a lot, the 6 people. But with these athletes, they know how to output, right? So if they do these over speeds and contrast working on top speed, they're going to be pretty tired. Their ability to get up and go is short. They need the rest. Their toleration for repetition being a little bit longer, they can handle doing 3 rounds of this, even if it takes up a majority of the class, because you can be more intentional about your coaching and get into some of the specifics and details. Their ability to stand around is long. So even if they're waiting, they can converse amongst each other, they can ask questions, or they can simply just be. As simple as that sounds. And their attention span is a little longer. And that's where the coach comes in, knowing that I'm going to set up this environment with a decent amount of standing because they need the rest. I know that I have to be intentional about just talking with them in between their reps, or watching when the one person sprints, obviously, but then quickly turning my head and talking with the ones who are just standing around. But knowing that they can't handle those things, you can coach and program a little differently. And the second infographic that I have is a dual x-axis, super fancy. I know I made it in PowerPoint. And so the difficulty to coach is higher with youth athletes, and it becomes easier as they get older. And consequently, the difficulty to program for is easier for youth athletes, but becomes harder as they go off to college. And this is not to say that any job is easier or harder. Oh my gosh, all you people with ego issues, like, just hear me out. It is harder to coach youth athletes, but it is easier to program them for, because you don't have to program too many things. Now, older athletes, they're not that hard to coach. They want to be there. They're more athletic. They can stand. They have an attention span. They need rest anyways, and that they can handle doing similar type things day in and day out. But to program and get all those nuances, that's the hard part. So just building on this idea of what considerations to keep in the back of your mind. Expectations. And we're near the end, and I think that this is huge, because as a coach, not everything will go according to plan. And one thing I believe about life is that it is not what happens, it is what happens relative to what you thought was going to happen. So to think that, oh, I'm going to put together this program and the athletes are going to come in and I'm going to be all excited and we're going to do everything rep for rep and exercise for exercise, and they're going to leave and say, oh my gosh, my life has changed. This is going to be the best day ever. Well, I hate to break it to you, that's probably not going to happen. So as a coach, knowing that I'm going to have all of these considerations and all of these skills I want to work on, and I have all these options in my back pocket, it's going to be fluid. Sometimes the athletes are going to be super into it. Sometimes they won't be. Sometimes they'll be super tired. Sometimes they'll be super focused. Sometimes they'll be bouncing off the walls. But just knowing that it's good to have a plan, but especially the younger they are, it's not always going to go according to plan. Now, expectations for your athletes as a coach, communicate these beforehand. And this is huge for many reasons, but a few examples of this is the schedule for the day and the equipment being used. So with communicating these expectations, right? So you saying at the beginning of the day, hey, this is going to be our acceleration focused workout. We're going to warm up, hit a little bit of top speed just quickly. We're going to get into our main acceleration for the day because that's the focus. We're going to do a little bit more technique work, and then we'll do some races, and then we'll hop in the lasers and get some times on you guys. And then we'll finish up with tag as well. So I'm laying out the workout and the expectations for that day, so there's no surprises. And the equipment being used is, if we have noodles, for example, as simple as this sounds, I'll say, hey guys, what are noodles used for when we play tag? Noodles are used for tagging. Oh, good, great. What are they not used for? Hitting, kicking, just anything that's not tagging. Yeah, that's good. So what are we going to use noodles for? Tagging. What are we not going to use them for? Anything you just said. Putting that out there. And here's why I said this will save you, ... is if the athletes start acting up halfway through, right? You can just bring them all in and say, hey, what's the schedule for today? If this goes long because we lost some focus, what's the first thing that we are not going to get to? Oh, well, we're not going to get to tag if this takes too long, you know? So then if they continue to act up and you don't get to tag, well, hey guys, I told you at the beginning what the schedule was. And halfway through, I told you that we were running a little bit behind schedule. So they have these expectations. There's no surprises. And with the equipment, if someone decides to throw or kick or whatever the noodle and you take it away, when I discussed what are they used for, what are they not used for, what happens if you use it how it's not supposed to be used, oh, I'll take it away. Well, then there's no surprise. It's one thing to get angry and frustrated and not punish, but like just take away stuff with youth athletes out of nowhere. Then everyone's confused, everyone's frustrated. But I basically gave them 2 chances at the beginning and in the middle to kind of focus up. And not that this is only negative, right? This can be positive as well, is to put some ownership on them to say, hey guys, like you're going to get out of this what you put into this. I'm going to do everything in my power to give you guys awesome workouts. I want to hit a ton of stuff today. This is great, and I hope that we get a lot of awesome work in. This is just to have a system or tool in your back pocket to help you navigate those unfocused periods, or not punishment, I can't find a better term, or things where you have to be a little bit of the bad cop, is communicating expectations and making it so there's no surprises. I think is super important. And I find a lot of success in with my youth athletes. So simplified, this simplified guide, if I had to put it in, 3 bullet points, here we are. You have no players, right? You only have athletes. And this was a conversation I had with a college advisor, that I would not be an athlete. I would be a baseball player because that is the only thing I played. And then an athlete would be a multi-sport player, I guess. And not to get into semantics, but don't think about your youth athletes as players of specific sports. Think about your youth athletes as athletes that can use emphases on certain things. So if they're athletes with a baseball problem, right, we might throw a little bit more med balls, or we might add in some shoulder care stuff. But to completely ignore top speed, or to completely ignore jumping and landing, I think would be more of a detriment than a benefit. So you have athletes, not players. Think, program, and coach in buckets. And this goes along with my 3rd bullet point, is you have all of these buckets, right, of these skills, qualities, windows for adaptation, top speed, acceleration, change of direction, agility, jumping, landing, lifting, quote unquote, miscellaneous. So this could be hand-eye coordination, tumbling, teamwork. And there's all of these things. If you can, in a 1 or 2 week period, check off all of these boxes or fill up all of these buckets, and this is kind of just your mindset of, how do I fill up all of these, right, over time, knowing that you're checking off all of these things, it becomes a little bit easier, right? So knowing that, hey, we haven't done anything hand-eye coordination, or we haven't done anything jumping, landing since last week, I'm going to give my athletes that option. Who's to say that you have to do one or you cannot do the other, especially with youth athletes? So you're giving them that feeling of autonomy. You're checking off those boxes, and then you can tie this into expectations. Hey guys, let's pick one. Whichever one we don't do today, we will for sure do tomorrow. So then if in tomorrow they're not as into it, it's, hey guys, I told you yesterday we were doing this today, So this kind of can all build on itself with all of these things that I've referenced throughout the course of this podcast. So if you think, program, and coach in these buckets, what have we done a lot of? What haven't we done? And am I at least slightly filling up all of these over time? Then this is going to be a pretty solid youth program. And my last thoughts, this was a quote from Derek Evely, one of the Bondarchuk disciples, super nice guy. He came and spoke at TC Boost. And are they, your youth athletes, are they getting better because of you or in spite of you? And this was a really interesting thought, or just change in perspective and mindset, we always say, oh, kids could just look at weights and get stronger, or kids just being in TC Boost, they can get faster, or all kids need to do is sprint. Well, there's some truth to that. So what are you doing to not get in their way? Are they getting better because of you or in spite of you? If we all can agree that they will get better almost just cuz, getting older and a little bit bigger, faster, stronger. So I think that that's a super important quote to keep in the back of your mind. And then he followed it up / I changed the phrasing, like, don't get in their way. They have this huge, long-term athletic development. Look at that. I should be a podcast host. Who are you to say that they're only a soccer player or only a baseball player, or because this is TC Boost is a sprint focused facility, that we cannot do any hand-eye coordination, or we cannot do any fundamental lifting. And I included 2 pictures of myself playing college sports, and it was just interesting when I was looking back for my pictures of my 8th grade coach, that I was never the most athletic. I didn't do anything like TC Boost growing up. That those who are going to be successful and athletic, you can't always predict where or know where you fall into this process, right? Was it because I had awesome coaches, or was it because I was just simply motivated and I made it happen on my own, or I simply just had the ability, right? So I guess if I had to somehow try to save this rant, is that as a coach, at least in the short time that you see them, whether it's for an off season, whether it's for an entire year, this could be a really small impact, relatively speaking, but you have to trust it. Imagine if my 8th grade coach that I referenced a few times wasn't into it, or he was just really stuck in his ways, wasn't intentional on making it fun, and I just fall out of love with baseball. Like this opportunity to hold a regional trophy, I would have never had. And another example that I referenced multiple times in this podcast is my mentor Steve worked with an athlete for 10 years, and the main, since he was in 5th grade, and the main thing was rehabbing from injuries. And imagine if the first return to play didn't go as well, that he quit lacrosse. He had a huge college lacrosse career, and that set him up for his actual career, wanting to go into college athletics, kind of in the administration side. So in regards to actually training them, are they getting better because of you or in spite of you? And then in regard of this long-term athletic development, don't get in their way. There's so many things that are going to happen just because, and things you can't control. So how are you intentionally not getting in their way? How are you intentionally supporting them, kind of building on whatever you're working on right now? It is a small impact, but you got to trust that it's happening. So hopefully that all made sense. TSP 103, any questions, let me know. It's an awesome opportunity to work with athletes of this age group, and happy coaching.